The sound of gunshots echoed through the dusty streets of Silver Creek as Cassandra Lawton clutched her chest, crimson blooming across her pale blue dress. She had only stepped out of the general store, arms full of supplies for her small homestead, when the bank robbery went terribly wrong. A stray bullet meant for the fleeing outlaw struck her instead, sending her collapsing to the wooden boardwalk as townsfolk screamed and scattered. Ethan Quinn had been tying his horse at the hitching post when the chaos erupted. The tall, broad-shouldered cowboy moved without thinking, rushing to the fallen woman while others fled. Her chestnut hair spilled across the weathered boards as he knelt beside her, his calloused hands pressing against the wound to slow the bleeding. "Stay with me, miss," he urged, his voice steady despite the panic gripping his chest. "Help, we need a doctor here." His deep voice carried across the now empty street as he cradled her head. It was 1874, and Silver Creek, Colorado was still establishing itself as more than just a mining town. The doctor's office sat at the far end of the main street, a modest building with a freshly painted sign. Dr. William Patterson emerged, medical bag in hand, having heard the commotion from his open window. "Get her to my office," the doctor commanded, his white beard flecked with tobacco stains. "Quickly now." Ethan lifted Cassandra's limp form with ease, her blood seeping into his worn cotton shirt as he carried her the short distance to the doctor's office. Her breaths came shallow and irregular against his chest, each one a whispered prayer for life. The doctor's assistant, a young man named Thomas, rushed to clear the examination table as Ethan gently laid Cassandra down. Her face had gone ashen, lips tinged blue, but she was still breathing. "You know this woman?" Dr. Patterson asked as he cut away the fabric around her wound. "No, sir," Ethan replied, stepping back to give the doctor room to work. "I was just outside when it happened. Bank robbery gone wrong." The doctor nodded grimly as he examined the wound. "Bullets lodged near her lung. I need to operate immediately." He looked up at Ethan. "You might as well go. This will take hours, and there's nothing you can do here." But Ethan couldn't bring himself to leave. Something about the woman's face, serene despite her grave injury, kept him rooted to the spot. "I'll stay if it's all the same to you. Someone should be here when she wakes." The doctor didn't argue, too focused on saving his patient's life to care about the stubborn cowboy who refused to leave. For hours, Ethan waited in the small anteroom, hat in his hands, boots caked with dried mud and her blood. He stared at the closed door, listening to the muffled sounds of the surgery taking place behind it. Night had fallen by the time Dr. Patterson emerged, his apron stained with blood and his eyes heavy with exhaustion. Ethan stood immediately, searching the doctor's face for any sign of hope. "I've removed the bullet," the doctor said, wiping his hands on a cloth. "But she's lost a lot of blood and there's been trauma to her lung. The next 24 hours will be critical." He paused, his expression grave. "I've done all I can, but I must be honest with you, she might not wake." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. He hadn't expected to feel such concern for a stranger, yet here he was, devastated by the possibility of her death. "Can I see her?" Dr. Patterson hesitated, then nodded. "Briefly, she needs rest." The small recovery room was sparsely furnished: a narrow bed, a wooden chair, and a small table with a kerosene lamp casting soft golden light across the walls. Cassandra lay motionless beneath a white sheet, her breathing so faint that Ethan found himself holding his own breath to listen for hers. He approached quietly, taking the chair beside her bed. Her face was pale as moonlight, her chestnut hair spread across the pillow, framing delicate features that seemed too young to be facing death so boldly. Without thinking, Ethan removed his hat and bowed his head. "Lord," he whispered, his voice barely audible in the quiet room, "I don't know this woman, but I reckon you do. If you could see fit to spare her, I'd be mighty grateful." The prayer felt awkward on his lips. It had been years since he'd spoken to God, but something about this woman made him want to try again. Dr. Patterson watched from the doorway for a moment before quietly stepping away, leaving Ethan alone with the unconscious woman and his halting prayers. Ethan didn't know how long he sat there, alternating between silent prayers and whispered reassurances to the stranger whose life hung by a thread. Eventually, Thomas brought him a cup of coffee and a blanket. "You planning on staying the night?" the young assistant asked. Ethan nodded, his eyes never leaving Cassandra's face. Someone should be here when she wakes. He emphasized the word when, refusing to accept it as a possibility. "What's your name, mister? In case anyone comes looking for her, I can tell them who's with her." "Ethan Quinn. I ranch about 10 miles south of town." He took a sip of the coffee, grimacing at its bitterness. "Do you know who she is?" Thomas nodded. "That's Cassandra Lawton. Moved here about 6 months ago after her husband died, lives alone in a small homestead east of town. Keeps to herself mostly, but comes in for supplies every couple weeks." Ethan absorbed this information, putting together the pieces of her life. A widow, alone in a harsh land. Something about that resonated with his own solitary existence. "I'll stay with her," he said firmly. "Got no one waiting at home for me anyway." The night passed slowly. Ethan dozed occasionally in the uncomfortable chair, jerking awake at every change in Cassandra's breathing. "Doctor." Patterson checked on his patient several times, his expression growing more concerned as the hours passed without any sign of improvement. By morning, Ethan's back ached and his eyes burned from lack of sleep, but he refused to leave. He watched the sunrise paint the small room with golden light, highlighting the delicate curve of Cassandra's cheek and the gentle rise and fall of her chest. "She's still with us," Dr. Patterson said as he entered to check her bandages. "That's something." "She's fighting," Ethan replied, his voice rough from disuse. "I can tell." The doctor gave him a curious look. "You don't even know her. Why are you so invested in her survival?" Ethan couldn't explain it, not even to himself. He simply shrugged. "Seems like the right thing to do." Throughout the day, Ethan remained at her bedside, leaving only briefly to telegraph his ranch hand, Miguel, that he wouldn't be returning for a few days. He told the telegraph operator to inform Miguel that he should handle the evening chores and feeding the livestock until further notice. When he returned to the doctor's office, he found Sheriff James Hollister standing in the recovery room, hat in hand, looking down at Cassandra. "Mr. Quinn," the sheriff acknowledged with a nod. "Doc tells me you witnessed the shooting." "From a distance," Ethan confirmed. "Saw her fall, but didn't see who fired the shot. Too much chaos." Sheriff Hollister nodded grimly. "Bank robbers got away with nearly $2,000, 3 people wounded, including Miss Lawton here. She got the worst of it," he sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "Damn shame." "She's had enough hardship." "You know her story?" Ethan asked, settling back into the chair beside her bed. "Some of it. Husband was killed by Apaches up near Fort Collins last year. She came here to start fresh, bought a small parcel with what little money she had left. Works hard, keeps to herself." The sheriff shook his head. "I'll need your statement about what you saw, but it can wait until." He glanced at Cassandra's still form, leaving the sentence unfinished. After the sheriff left, Ethan resumed his vigil. "As the second night approached, Doctor." Patterson's concern deepened. "Her fever's rising," he told Ethan as he placed a cool cloth on Cassandra's forehead. "Infection may be setting in if she doesn't show improvement by morning." He didn't need to finish the thought. That night, Ethan prayed more fervently than he had in years. He spoke to God about this woman he didn't know, about the injustice of her suffering, about the strange pull he felt toward her. Between prayers, he talked to Cassandra herself, telling her about his ranch, about the Mustangs he was training, about anything that came to mind. "You need to fight, Miss Lawton," he said softly, daring to take her limp hand in his. Her skin burned with fever, but he held on nonetheless. "This world's not done with you yet." Near midnight, her condition worsened. Her breathing became labored, and she began to thrash weakly against some invisible enemy. Ethan called for the doctor, who administered a tincture of willow bark and ordered cold compresses. "Talk to her," Dr. Patterson suggested as he prepared more medicine. "Sometimes they can hear us, even when they're like this." Might help anchor her. So Ethan talked. He told her about growing up in Texas, about losing his parents to cholera when he was 16, about drifting north and eventually saving enough to buy his small ranch. He told her about his dream of breeding the finest horses in Colorado territory, about the lonely nights under the stars, about the peace he found in the mountains. "You should see the wildflowers that bloom near my creek in spring," he said, his voice rough with emotion and exhaustion. "Never seen anything so pretty. Maybe you could come see them sometime." As dawn broke on the third day, Cassandra's fever finally broke. Ethan, who had dozed off with his head resting on the edge of her bed, their hands still intertwined, woke to find Dr. Patterson smiling for the first time since the shooting, her breathing stronger, the doctor said, and the fever's subsiding. She's fighting back. Relief flooded through Ethan, leaving him light-headed. "She's going to wake up." "I believe she will," Dr. Patterson replied cautiously. "Though she's still not out of danger entirely. The body's been through a tremendous ordeal." Throughout that day, Ethan noticed small changes, color returning to her cheeks, her breathing becoming deeper and more regular, occasional movements of her fingers and eyelids. He continued talking to her, encouraged by these signs of improvement. Late in the afternoon of the third day, as sunlight streamed through the small window, Cassandra Lawton opened her eyes. At first, her gaze was unfocused, confused. Then her eyes found Ethan's face and her brow furrowed slightly. "Who?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Ethan Quinn, madam," he said, his heart racing with joy at this simple interaction. "You're in Dr. Patterson's office in Silver Creek. You were shot during a bank robbery 3 days ago." Recognition and then fear flickered across her face. She tried to sit up but gasped at the pain, falling back against the pillows. "Easy now," Ethan soothed. "You need to rest. You've been through hell and back, Doctor." Patterson, hearing voices, hurried into the room. His face lit up when he saw Cassandra conscious. "Miss Lawton, welcome back to the land of the living." He quickly checked her pulse and examined her eyes. "You've had us quite worried." "Thirsty," she managed to say. Ethan helped her sip water from a cup, supporting her head gently. Her eyes never left his face, filled with questions. "You've been here 3 days, she asked after drinking. Ethan nodded, suddenly embarrassed by his devotion to a stranger. "Seemed wrong to leave you alone." A faint smile touched her lips before exhaustion claimed her again, her eyes drifting closed. But this time it was merely sleep, not the deathly unconsciousness of before. Dr. Patterson patted Ethan's shoulder. "You should get some real rest yourself, son. She's turned the corner now." But Ethan couldn't bring himself to leave, not when she had finally opened her eyes, spoken his name. He sent word to his ranch that he'd be away a few more days, ignoring the questioning look from the telegraph operator. Let people talk, he hardly cared what anyone thought. Over the next few days, Cassandra grew stronger. She stayed awake for longer periods, eating small amounts of broth and talking more. She learned that Ethan had barely left her side since the shooting, and though she seemed puzzled by his dedication, she didn't object to his presence. "Why?" she asked him on the 5th day as he helped her sit up against the pillows. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Ethan considered her question, searching for an answer that wouldn't sound foolish. "I'm not rightly sure," he admitted. "Something just told me I needed to be here. That you shouldn't be alone." Her eyes, a striking hazel that reminded him of sunlight through autumn leaves, studied his face. "Well, Mr. Quinn, I'm grateful. Not many would show such kindness." "Ethan," he corrected gently. "Please call me Ethan." "A week after the shooting, Doctor." Patterson declared Cassandra well enough to leave his care, though she would need several more weeks of rest to fully recover. This presented a problem. Her homestead was isolated, and she was in no condition to care for herself. "I could stay with her," offered Mrs. Abernathy, the milliner whose shop adjoined the doctor's office. "My spare room's small, but she can come to my ranch," Ethan interrupted, surprising himself as much as everyone else. He quickly added, "I've got a proper guest house where the previous owner's mother lived. It's comfortable, and my housekeeper, Mrs. Ramirez, could look after her during the day while I'm working." Dr. Patterson frowned. "That's very generous, Mr. Quinn, but it might not be appropriate for a single woman to I'd like to accept," Cassandra said quietly, her voice still weak but her expression determined. "If Mr. Quinn is willing to open his home, I'd be grateful. I have no family here and my homestead is too isolated for me to manage alone right now." The doctor looked between them, clearly conflicted about the propriety of the arrangement. "Well, if you're certain—" "I am," she said firmly. The next day, Ethan arrived with his wagon, padded with quilts and pillows to make the journey as comfortable as possible for Cassandra. He had spent the previous night preparing the guest house, a small but well-built cabin about 50 yards from the main house. Mrs. Ramirez, his housekeeper who came 3 times a week from the nearby Mexican settlement, had helped clean and air the rooms, storing fresh linens and arranging flowers from the garden. Dr. Patterson gave final instructions for Cassandra's care, changing bandages, watching for fever, ensuring she ate properly to regain her strength. He provided medicines and promised to ride out in a week to check on her progress. The journey to Ethan's ranch took nearly 2 hours, traveling slowly to avoid jostling Cassandra's healing wound. She dozed for much of the trip, occasionally waking to observe the changing landscape as they left the town behind and ventured into rolling grasslands dotted with pines and aspens. "It's beautiful out here," she commented as they crested a hill that revealed a sweeping vista of mountains in the distance. "Wait till you see the ranch," Ethan replied, pleased by her approval. "It's nothing grand, but I think it's the prettiest spot in Colorado." As they approached the final rise before his property, Ethan felt an unexpected nervousness. He'd never brought a woman to his home before, and suddenly he worried how it would appear to someone like Cassandra. His concerns evaporated when they reached the top of the rise, and she gasped softly. Below them lay a small valley, sheltered by hills and bisected by a clear creek. The main house was modest but well-maintained, with a broad porch and climbing roses. Nearby stood a large barn, corral, and several smaller outbuildings. The guest house sat beneath 3 large cottonwood trees, its windows gleaming in the afternoon light. "Oh, Ethan," she breathed. "You weren't exaggerating. It's lovely." Pride swelled in his chest at her words. He guided the wagon down the gentle slope toward the buildings where Mrs. Ramirez waited on the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "This is Sophia Ramirez," Ethan introduced as he helped Cassandra from the wagon, supporting her weight as she stood shakily. "She keeps me from living like a complete savage, Mrs. Ramirez, a stout woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked black hair, clicked her tongue disapprovingly at his joke. "Do not listen to him, Miss Lawton. He is a good man, just terrible at compliments." Her accent was thick but her English clear. "Come, I have prepared everything for you. You must be exhausted from the journey." With Ethan's support on one side and Mrs. Ramirez on the other, Cassandra made her way to the guest house. Inside, they found a cheerful sitting room with a fireplace, a small kitchen area, and a bedroom with a large window overlooking the creek. Fresh wildflowers stood in vases on every table and the bed was turned down invitingly. "It's perfect," Cassandra said, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you both." "Rest now," Mrs. Ramirez said firmly. "I will bring dinner later." "The doctor said you need sleep more than anything." After helping Cassandra settle into bed, Ethan reluctantly left to tend to ranch chores that had been neglected during his absence. Miguel, his ranch hand, had done his best, but there was much to catch up on. That evening, after checking that Cassandra had eaten the soup Mrs. Ramirez prepared and was resting comfortably, Ethan sat on his porch watching the sunset paint the hills in shades of gold and crimson. For the first time in years, his ranch didn't feel lonely. Knowing Cassandra was just across the yard filled him with an unfamiliar contentment. Over the next few days, a routine developed. Mrs. Ramirez would arrive early to help Cassandra with her personal needs and prepare meals. Ethan would work his ranch during the day, checking on Cassandra at midday and spending evenings sitting with her, either on the guest house porch or by her bedside if she was particularly tired. They talked for hours, learning each other's stories. He told her about his dreams for the ranch, about the wild mustangs he was gentling, about his plans to expand his breeding program. She shared memories of her childhood in Missouri, of her brief marriage to a kind but restless man who had brought her west seeking fortune, of her determination to make a life for herself after his death. "I was so angry when James was killed," she confessed one evening as they sat watching fireflies dance over the creek. "Not just at the men who took his life, but at him for bringing me to this wild place and then leaving me alone in it." Ethan nodded, understanding the complex emotions of grief. "And now, are you still angry?" She considered his question, her face thoughtful in the fading light. "Less so. I've come to see that this land, for all its harshness, has a beauty that gets into your blood. I couldn't imagine living anywhere else now, even after what happened in town." He asked quietly. Cassandra's hand drifted to her side where the healing wound still pained her. "That could have happened anywhere. Bad men aren't unique to the West." She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the first evening stars. "Besides, if I hadn't been here, I wouldn't have met you." The simple statement sent Ethan's heart racing. He wanted to reach for her hand but hesitated, uncertain if such a gesture would be welcome. Instead, he smiled and said, "I reckon we both got lucky that way, though I wish the circumstances had been different." As the days passed, Cassandra grew stronger. She began taking short walks with Ethan's support, gradually increasing the distance. He showed her his favorite spots around the ranch: the bend in the creek where trout gathered in the deep pool, the meadow where wildflowers grew in riotous profusion, the hilltop where you could see for miles in every direction. 2 weeks after her arrival, Dr. Patterson rode out to check on his patient and was impressed by her progress. "You're healing remarkably well, Miss Lawton," he declared after examining her wound. "The fresh air and good care are clearly agreeing with you." He glanced at Ethan, a knowing look in his eyes. "Though I suspect the company hasn't hurt either." Cassandra blushed at his implication, but didn't deny it. "Mr. Quinn has been a perfect gentleman and a dear friend." "Well, you're well enough now that you could return to town if you wished," the doctor said. "Mrs. Abernathy would still be happy to have you stay with her until you're fully recovered." Ethan felt his stomach tighten at the thought of Cassandra leaving. These weeks with her had been the happiest he could remember, and the idea of returning to his solitary existence filled him with dread. "I think I'd prefer to stay here a while longer if Mr. Quinn doesn't object," Cassandra said, looking at Ethan questioningly. "I still tire easily, and the peace here has been healing in more ways than one." Relief flooded through him. "You're welcome to stay as long as you like," he said, perhaps too quickly. "The guest house is yours for as long as you need it." Dr. Patterson looked between them, his expression unreadable. "Very well, I'll return in another 2 weeks unless you need me sooner." As he prepared to leave, he pulled Ethan aside. "A word of advice, young man. If your intentions toward Miss Lawton are honorable, you might want to make them known soon. A woman in her position can't afford to have her reputation questioned." Ethan nodded, understanding the doctor's meaning. In a small community like Silver Creek, gossip traveled faster than telegraph messages. Though he'd been careful to maintain propriety, the extended stay of a young widow at a bachelor's ranch would inevitably raise eyebrows. That evening, after Mrs. Ramirez had gone home, Ethan found Cassandra sitting on a bench near the creek, wrapped in a shawl against the cooling air. The setting sun turned her chestnut hair to flame, and for a moment he simply stood watching her, struck by how perfectly she seemed to belong in this setting. "May I join you?" he asked, approaching slowly. She looked up with a smile that warmed him more than any campfire could. "Please do. I was just thinking about how peaceful it is here." He sat beside her, careful to leave a proper distance between them. "The doctor thinks you're doing well." "Yes," she agreed. "Thanks to your care." Cassandra, he began, her name still feeling like a gift on his lips, I need to ask you something. She turned to face him, her expression curious. What is it? Ethan took a deep breath, gathering his courage. These past weeks, having you here, they've been the best of my life. I know it's fast and maybe foolish, but I need to know if you could ever. He faltered, searching for the right words. Cassandra's eyes softened as understanding dawned. She reached out, placing her hand gently over his. Are you asking if I have feelings for you, Ethan Quinn? He nodded, not trusting his voice. I do, she said simply. How could I not? You saved my life, you've shown me kindness when I needed it most. And more than that, you've shown me what kind of man you truly are, honorable, gentle, hardworking. She paused, a shadow crossing her face. But I have nothing to offer you. My homestead is small and struggling, and I don't want anything from you except your heart, Ethan interrupted, turning his hand to hold hers properly. Everything else is just details we can figure out together. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. What are you saying, Ethan? I'm saying that I've fallen in love with you, Cassandra Lawton. I know it's sudden, and I'll understand if you need time, but I wanted you to know how I feel. A tear spilled down her cheek as she smiled. It is sudden, but life out here doesn't always give us the luxury of time, does it? Sometimes you just have to recognize a blessing when it appears. And am I a blessing? He asked, hardly daring to hope. In answer, she leaned forward and pressed her lips softly to his. The kiss was gentle, tentative, but it sent warmth coursing through Ethan's entire body. When she pulled back, her eyes were shining. Does that answer your question? She asked, a hint of mischief in her smile. Ethan laughed, joy bubbling up inside him. It's a start, he said, leaning in to kiss her again, more deeply this time. As the weeks passed, Cassandra's strength returned fully. She and Ethan fell into a comfortable routine, sharing meals, working together around the ranch, and spending evenings planning their future. They decided to sell her small homestead and use the money to expand Ethan's breeding operation. She proved to have a keen eye for horseflesh and a natural way with the animals that impressed even Miguel, who had been skeptical at first about having a woman involved in ranch business. News of their relationship spread quickly through Silver Creek. Most townsfolk approved, seeing it as a romantic outcome to a tragic event. A few raised concerns about the propriety of their living arrangement, even with Mrs. Ramirez serving as a chaperone of sorts. Sheriff Hollister rode out one afternoon, ostensibly to update them on the bank robbery investigation. The culprits had been caught in Denver trying to spend their stolen money, but really to assess the situation himself. People are talking, he told Ethan bluntly as they stood by the corral watching Cassandra feed carrots to a young colt. Most don't mean any harm by it, but you should know. We're getting married next month, Ethan replied, his eyes never leaving Cassandra's form. Pastor Williams has agreed to perform the ceremony here at the ranch. The sheriff nodded approvingly. Good, she deserves happiness after everything she's been through. He clapped Ethan on the shoulder. And so do you, Quinn, so do you. The wedding preparations became the talk of the town. Mrs. Ramirez and several women from the Mexican settlement sewed a beautiful wedding dress for Cassandra. Ethan ordered a new suit from Denver. The townsfolk, eager to participate in such a joyful event after the tension of the bank robbery, offered to contribute food, decorations, and music for the celebration. The night before their wedding, Ethan found Cassandra standing on the hilltop where they had first declared their feelings for each other. The moon was full, casting silver light over the landscape and illuminating her profile as she gazed toward the mountains, having second thoughts. He asked as he approached, only half joking. She turned to him with a smile that dispelled any concerns. Not one. I was just thinking about how strange life's path can be. If I hadn't been in town that day, if that bullet had been an inch to the right. She shuddered slightly. Ethan wrapped his arms around her, pulling her against his chest. I try not to think about that. All that matters is that you're here now, and tomorrow you'll be my wife. Cassandra leaned back against him, her hands covering his where they rested on her waist. Do you believe in fate, Ethan? That some things are meant to be, no matter how unlikely they seem, he considered the question seriously. I never used to. Always figured a man made his own way in life through hard work and determination. He pressed a kiss to her temple. But how else can I explain finding you? What are the odds that I'd be in exactly the right place at the right time to help you? That feels like more than just chance to me. She turned in his arms to face him. The doctor told me something I never shared with you. When I was unconscious, fighting the fever, he truly believed I wouldn't survive the night. He said later that it was as if someone was anchoring me to this world, refusing to let me go. Her eyes, luminous in the moonlight, searched his face. That was you, Ethan. Your prayers, your voice talking to me through the darkness, you called me back. Emotion tightened his throat as he remembered those desperate hours, the quiet prayers whispered at her bedside. Maybe we called each other, he said softly. I was just as lost as you were in my own way. Their wedding day dawned clear and bright, the September air crisp with the first hint of autumn. The ranch had been transformed, lanterns hung from tree branches, wildflowers adorned every surface, and tables laden with food stretched across the yard between the main house and the barn, which had been cleared for dancing. Nearly everyone from Silver Creek attended, along with ranchers from neighboring properties and families from the Mexican settlement. Dr. Patterson stood proudly as Cassandra's surrogate father, ready to give her away. Sheriff Hollister served as Ethan's best man, while Mrs. Ramirez's granddaughter, Elena, was Cassandra's maid of honor when Cassandra appeared in her wedding dress, a simple but elegant creation of ivory silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Ethan felt his heart might burst with love and pride. Her hair was adorned with wildflowers, and she carried a bouquet of the same blooms that had first drawn her admiration when she arrived at the ranch. Pastor Williams conducted the ceremony beneath an arch of aspens at the edge of the creek. The vows they exchanged were traditional, but spoken with such genuine emotion that many guests wiped away tears. When Ethan finally kissed his bride as the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, cheers erupted from the assembled crowd. The celebration continued well into the night. There was dancing to fiddle music, feasting on barbecued beef and Mexican dishes prepared by Mrs. Ramirez and her family, and many toasts to the health and happiness of the newlyweds. As the evening wore on, Ethan found a moment alone with his new wife, drawing her away from the festivities to the quiet of the creek bank. "Happy, Mrs. Quinn?" he asked, still marveling at the right to call her by his name. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she replied, her eyes reflecting the stars above. "Though I do feel a bit guilty." "Guilty? About what?" She smiled mischievously. "About being grateful for that bank robbery. If it hadn't happened, we might never have met." Ethan laughed, drawing her into his arms. "I reckon we'd have found each other somehow. Some things are just meant to be, remember?" "Yes," she agreed, stretching up to kiss him. "Some things are meant to be." 1 year later, Ethan sat beside Cassandra's bed in their home, holding her hand as she labored to bring their child into the world. The pregnancy had been unexpected but welcomed with joy by both of them. Now, after hours of labor, Cassandra was exhausted, her face pale with strain. "You're doing wonderfully," the midwife, Mrs. Torres, encouraged. "Not much longer now." Ethan wiped Cassandra's brow with a cool cloth, his heart aching at her pain yet swelling with love for her courage. "You're the strongest woman I've ever known," he told her. "Our child is blessed to have you as a mother." Cassandra managed a weary smile between contractions. "I couldn't do this without you," she whispered. "Your strength gives me mine." Another hour passed before their daughter entered the world with a healthy cry that brought tears to Ethan's eyes. Mrs. Torres cleaned the infant, wrapped her in a soft blanket, and placed her in Cassandra's arms. "She's perfect," Cassandra breathed, counting tiny fingers and toes. The baby had a dusting of dark hair, and when she briefly opened her eyes, they appeared to be the same hazel as her mother's. "What shall we name her?" Ethan asked, gently touching his daughter's cheek with one finger. Cassandra looked up at him, love shining in her eyes despite her exhaustion. I thought perhaps Grace, because that's what brought us together. Grace Quinn, Ethan tested the name, finding it perfect. Our little miracle. As twilight settled over the ranch, Ethan stood at the window of their bedroom, cradling his newborn daughter while Cassandra slept. The ranch had prospered over the past year. His horse breeding business had gained recognition throughout the territory. And with Cassandra's help, they had expanded into raising cattle as well. But no success in business could compare to the joy he felt looking down at Grace's sleeping face, or glancing over at his wife's peaceful form. From the brink of tragedy, they had found a love deeper and more enduring than either had dared to hope for. Outside, the stars began to appear, the same stars that had witnessed his desperate prayers at Cassandra's bedside a year before. Ethan whispered a prayer of gratitude now, for the life they had built together and for the future that stretched before them, as vast and promising as the western sky. Grace stirred in his arms, her tiny mouth forming a perfect O as she yawned. Ethan smiled, remembering the doctor's words that seemed so long ago now. She might not wake. How wrong he had been. Cassandra had not only awakened, she had brought light and life to Ethan's world in ways he could never have imagined. As he gazed out at the land that was their home, Ethan Quinn felt a contentment that went bone deep. This was where he belonged, with the woman who had captured his heart and the daughter who embodied their love. Whatever challenges the future might hold, they would face them together, their bond forged in the crucible of near tragedy and tempered by the quiet strength of abiding love. In the soft glow of the lamp, he looked once more at his sleeping wife and daughter, his family, and knew with absolute certainty that he had found his true home at last.